I'm David. I'm nothing special, but I've always tried to be a good man. I sell small goods at a flea market in a modest town you've probably never heard of. Not rich, not famous, just enough. Enough to keep a roof over our heads, enough to put food on the table, enough to laugh every now and then, to dream a little, and most importantly, to love deeply. I grew up poor, one of three kids, raised by a mother who worked two jobs and a father who drank too much and loved too little. From the moment I could stand on my own 2 feet, I knew if I wanted anything good in this life, I'd have to fight for it myself. And so I did. I fought for every dollar I made. I fought for the respect of the people around me. I fought for a simple dream, a wife, a child, a little house filled with laughter. It wasn't much to ask for, or so I thought. I met Julia when I was 22. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the world looks washed out and tired. I had just closed my stall early because the customers weren't coming out in the storm. As I hurried toward the bus stop, I saw her, struggling with her wheelchair, trying to maneuver it over a flooded curb. Without thinking, I ran over and lifted the front wheels, helping her across. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, her cheeks flushing pink. She had the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen, even soaked in rain, even shivering, even sitting in that battered wheelchair. Julia shone. She wasn't like other women I'd known. She didn't hide her vulnerability behind pride or sarcasm. She wore her heart plainly, honestly, like an open book, and somehow, without warning, she slipped into my life and refused to let go. Our courtship wasn't like in the movies. There were no grand gestures, no candlelit dinners or luxurious vacations. It was coffee shared under a broken awning. It was laughing over silly jokes while fixing her squeaky wheelchair. It was sitting together on the worn front steps of her apartment building, watching the sun set behind the grocery store. Simple. Honest, real. We got married a year later. There was no fancy venue, just a cramped city hall and a few close friends. But when she said, "I do," and looked at me with those fierce, unwavering eyes, I felt richer than any man alive. Marriage was not a fairy tale. It was cracked floors that needed patching. It was bills that came faster than paychecks. It was long nights fixing a leaking roof with my own 2 hands while Julia watched from the doorway, worry etched into her face. Still, I wouldn't have traded it for anything. We moved into a small house on the edge of town, the paint peeled from the siding. The yard was a patchy mess of weeds, but to me it was a castle, a fortress of hope, built not from wealth but from stubborn love. Julia made the best of it. Despite her disability, she managed to keep our home warm and full of life. She sewed curtains from old sheets. She painted the walls bright colors. She laughed. Oh, how she laughed, filling every crack in the house with joy. I worked harder than ever. Every morning before the sun rose, I loaded my little pickup truck with boxes of goods and headed to the flea market. I sold tools, cookware, trinkets, sometimes handmade crafts Julia created with her deft, patient fingers. Some days were good. Others, I came home with barely enough to cover groceries. But every time I stepped through that front door and saw Julia's smile, tired but genuine, I felt like the richest man alive. Of course, there were struggles we couldn't ignore. Julia had bad days, days when the pain in her legs became unbearable, days when the chair felt like a prison instead of a lifeline. Sometimes she would break down, crying silently at the dinner table. I would kneel beside her, take her hand, and whisper, "We're in this together, sweetheart." Always. And I meant it, every damn word. No matter how heavy the burden, I carried it willingly. Because that's what love is, not grand declarations or perfect days, but showing up day after day, even when the world feels too heavy to bear. Our neighbors often pitied us. They saw a struggling man and a woman trapped in a wheelchair and assumed we were miserable. But they didn't see the late nights when we sat on the porch, sipping cheap wine and making grand plans for a future we could barely afford to dream about. They didn't see Julia's eyes sparkle when we slow danced in the kitchen to a scratchy old record. They didn't see the fierce pride in my chest, every time she beat me at cards and crowed about it for days. Then, against all odds, the miracle happened. Julia became pregnant. It wasn't supposed to happen. That's what the doctors had told us years ago when we first dreamed about starting a family. Between Julia's spinal injuries and a host of other complications, the chances were slim to none. We were warned, sternly, clinically, not to hope too much, so we didn't. Instead, we poured our love into each other, into building our life, into believing that maybe happiness didn't have to look like the fairy tales. Maybe it was enough just to have each other, until the day Julia sat me down at our kitchen table, her hands trembling, her face pale. She didn't say a word at first. She just slid a small white stick across the table toward me. Two bright pink lines stared up at me, bold and undeniable. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Is this real? I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. Julia nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. And right there, in that cramped kitchen, under the flickering overhead light, I fell to my knees and wept. The next few months were a blur of cautious excitement and paralyzing fear. Every doctor's appointment was a battle between hope and dread. We held our breath through every ultrasound, every blood test, every wary glance from the specialists. I read every book I could find about high-risk pregnancies. I built a crib from scratch, sanding each piece of wood by hand until it was smooth as glass. I refused to let a single negative thought take root, because this baby, this impossible, miraculous baby, was already the center of our world. Julia struggled. The pregnancy was hard on her body, harder than anyone had warned us. There were nights when she cried out from pain, clutching her swollen belly, and I could do nothing but hold her and pray silently to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore. Please, I whispered into the dark, night after night. Please just let them both be okay. The night Alex was born was a stormy night, fitting somehow for the chaos and terror and awe that unfolded. Julia's water broke early, a full month before her due date. I bundled her into the old pickup, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key, and tore through the rain-soaked streets to the hospital. The labor was long, agonizing, complicated. I was forced to wait outside the operating room, pacing like a madman, while a parade of grim-faced nurses and doctors disappeared behind swinging doors. At one point, a nurse came out and gently asked me to prepare myself for the worst. I refused. I sat in that cold, sterile hallway and refused to believe that my entire world could be ripped away from me in a single night. Hours later, just as dawn began to creep over the horizon, a doctor emerged. He was smiling. Tired, worn, but smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Miller," he said. "You have a healthy baby boy, and your wife is going to be just fine." I don't remember standing up. I don't remember the journey down the hall or the first sight of Julia, pale but grinning weakly from her hospital bed. I only remember the moment they placed Alex in my arms. He was so small, so perfect. A tiny, furious ball of life, squalling at the indignity of being dragged into the cold world. I cradled him against my chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against mine. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be terrified by love, because now I had something to lose. I had something so precious it made every hardship, every sacrifice, every scar on my soul worth it. We named him Alexander, strong, noble, a name fit for a fighter, because that's exactly what he was. And as I stood there, staring down at my son, I made another silent vow: whatever it takes, I will protect you. Always. Fatherhood didn't come with a manual, especially not when you were broke, exhausted, and terrified out of your mind. But love, real love, makes you resourceful in ways you never imagined. The first few months were brutal. Alex had colic. He screamed for hours every night, his tiny face screwed up in a knot of fury and discomfort. Julia, still recovering from the difficult birth, couldn't handle the long hours of crying, the endless rocking and pacing. So I did it. Every night I would bundle Alex against my chest and walk slow, heavy laps around our tiny living room. I sang lullabies off key. I whispered stories about dragons and brave knights. I promised him that the world was big and scary, but it would be okay because he had me. Some nights I cried right along with him, but I never put him down. Not once. As he grew, life didn't get easier, just different. Money was always tight. When Alex needed new shoes, I patched up old ones instead. When school asked for supplies, I took extra shifts at the market, hauling heavy boxes until my back screamed. Christmases were simple. Birthdays were homemade cakes and secondhand toys, but somehow it was enough, more than enough. Because Alex smiled, he laughed. He hugged me every night before bed with a fierce sincerity that made every sacrifice worth it 1,000 times over. He was a good kid, one of those rare souls who just got it, got how hard we were working, got how much we loved him. He never whined about not having the latest gadgets or trendy clothes. He wore his hand-me-downs with pride. He studied hard, played harder, and loved us with a heart bigger than the sky. I taught him the only things I really knew. Work hard, be kind, tell the truth even when it's hard. Take care of the people who take care of you. I wasn't a wise man. I didn't have fancy degrees or important titles. But I knew what mattered, and I tried, God, I tried, to pass it on to him. Julia, despite her limitations, was the heart of our home. She spent endless afternoons tutoring Alex when homework overwhelmed him. She cheered the loudest at every spelling bee, every little league game, every art show where Alex taped up some crooked drawing and grinned like he'd just conquered the world. Our house was noisy, messy, chaotic, but it pulsed with a kind of fierce, stubborn joy that made every cracked window and squeaky floorboard feel sacred. There were moments, of course, when worry crept in. Late nights after Alex had fallen asleep, Julia would sometimes sit by the window, staring out at the dark street, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "What if we can't give him enough?" she whispered once. I pulled her into my arms, kissed her temple, and said, "Love is enough. As long as he knows he's loved, it will be enough." I believed it. I had to. Because if it wasn't, what else did we have? Years rolled by. Alex blossomed into a young man that made my heart ache with pride. Tall, strong, smart, a bright flame burning against the gray backdrop of our modest life. He excelled at school, winning scholarships and awards we could never have afforded on our own. Teachers praised his work ethic, his kindness, his unshakable sense of integrity. Neighbors would stop me on the street just to say, "You did good, David. You raised a fine young man." And every time I'd nod and smile, swallowing the lump in my throat and think, no, he raised himself. I just held the ladder. As Alex neared high school graduation, opportunities began pouring in. Letters from universities with names I barely dared to whisper. Offers for internships, scholarships, dreams so big I almost couldn't fit them into my weary, work-worn mind. And through it all, Alex never changed. He still helped me load the truck on weekends, still cooked dinner when Julia was having a rough day, still hugged me goodnight like he had when he was 6 years old. He was my son, my pride, my heart walking around outside my body. And I thought, foolishly, naively, that nothing could ever take that away from me. When Alex received his acceptance letter, it felt like the whole world tilted on its axis. He got into Stanford, not the community college down the street, not the decent state university we had dared to hope for. Stanford, Julia cried when he read the letter out loud, her hands shaking so badly she had to set her coffee down before she spilled it. I sat there stunned, the words blurring in front of my eyes. "Full scholarship," Alex said, his voice trembling with excitement. "They want me, Dad." "They really want me!" I laughed. I cried. I hugged him so hard he made a strangled noise and laughed right back. thumping my back with those big, strong hands that once had clutched my fingers in toddler-sized fists. We celebrated with a homemade cake and a battered bottle of champagne a neighbor gifted us. Julia strung up a crooked banner that said, "Congratulations," across the living room, and we danced like fools under it until the neighbors banged on the walls. It was, for a little while, perfect. Preparing to send Alex away was bittersweet. We scraped together every spare penny for travel expenses and dorm supplies. Julia spent weeks sewing little tags with his name onto his clothes, her hands steady even when her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I worked overtime at the market, my back aching, my hands raw, determined to give him every possible advantage. "You don't have to do this, Dad," Alex said once, watching me count out crumpled bills into a battered envelope. "I got scholarships. I'll get a part-time job if I need to." But I shook my head fiercely. "Your job is to study, to be brilliant, to chase every damn dream you've got. Let me do this much for you, son." And he let me, because that's the kind of boy he was. The day we dropped him off at campus was one of the proudest and hardest days of my life. The campus was like another world. Elegant brick buildings, sprawling green lawns, students laughing and bustling about with a kind of casual confidence that made my hands sweat. Alex fit in instantly. He shook hands with professors. He made friends before we even finished unloading the truck. He beamed with a kind of light I hadn't seen before, a light that said, "I belong here." And he did. Julia and I stayed for dinner at a cheap diner off campus before heading home. The whole meal, she barely touched her food. She kept glancing out the window, fidgeting with her napkin, falling into long silences. "He's going to be okay," I told her, trying to soothe whatever invisible ache gnawed at her. "He's smart, he's strong, we raised him right." She nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. There was something tight in her posture, something brittle, something I couldn't quite name. When we got home that night, she disappeared into the bathroom and stayed there for nearly an hour. When she finally came out, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "I'm just tired," she said. It's been a big day. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. After all, we were just two parents dealing with the bittersweet ache of watching their only child leave the nest, right? Still, little things started to gnaw at me. Phone calls from Alex grew less frequent, understandable given his workload, but sometimes, when I asked to speak to him, Julia would say, "He's busy, honey. He'll call you tomorrow." And something in the way she said it, a softness, almost a guilt, made my stomach twist. One night, a few months later, I caught Julia staring at an old photo of Alex when he was a baby. She didn't notice me at first. She traced his face with one trembling finger, her expression unreadable, somewhere between grief and longing. "He's so much like him," she whispered. I stepped closer. "Like who?" I asked. She startled, dropping the photo. It clattered to the floor, the glass cracking in the corner. Julia bent to pick it up, avoiding my eyes. "Like you," she said too quickly. "I meant like you." But something in her voice, something hollow, told me she wasn't telling the whole truth. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, that this, all of this, was just the growing pains of a changing family. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. Tiny, quiet, but alive. And seeds, once planted, have a way of growing, even in the darkest soil. It happened on a Wednesday, a day like any other. I was setting up my stall at the market, unpacking a shipment of used power tools when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was too early for Alex to be calling. He usually texted or sent quick emails between classes, but some instinct I couldn't name, made me wipe my hands and pick up. "Mr. Miller?" A woman's voice, professional, calm. Too calm. "This is Mercy Hospital. Your son, Alexander, has been admitted following a traffic accident. He's stable, but we need you to come in to complete some paperwork and authorize a few procedures." The world around me blurred. The noise of the market, the clatter of tools, the buzz of conversation. It all faded into a single piercing tone of fear. "I'm coming," I managed to say. "I'm on my way." The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and honking horns. I must have run half a dozen stop signs. I didn't care. All I could see was Alex, my Alex, hurt, alone, maybe worse. The thought of him lying in some sterile, fluorescent-lit room, scared and in pain, made my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. When I burst through the emergency room doors, a nurse guided me quickly to a curtained-off cubicle. And there he was, battered but alive, a few stitches across his forehead, a sling for his right arm, bruises blooming purple and green along his jaw, but alive. "Dad," he croaked, managing a shaky smile, "you should see the other guy." I laughed, a short, broken sound, and collapsed into the chair beside him, burying my face in my hands for a moment, just to hold back the sob of relief clawing at my throat. The doctors reassured me. No major injuries, a mild concussion, a dislocated shoulder. "Just lucky," one of them said with a smile. "Real lucky." But as part of the standard protocol for head injuries, they ran a full panel of blood tests, checking for internal bleeding, clotting disorders, anything that might complicate his recovery. Nothing unusual. Just routine, or so I thought. They handed me a clipboard of consent forms to sign. Standard language. I scribbled my name across the lines without reading. I would have signed anything, agreed to anything, if it meant getting Alex home safe. It wasn't until the next afternoon that the hospital called me again. "Mr. Miller," the nurse said, "we need to discuss Alexander's blood work." "Could you come back in?" I frowned. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing urgent," she said quickly, "but the doctor would prefer to speak with you in person." My gut twisted. I drove back to the hospital, my palms slick against the steering wheel. Julia wanted to come, but I told her no, insisted she stay home and rest. Some part of me, some stubborn, primitive part, wanted to protect her, shield her from whatever storm was brewing. The doctor met me in a small consultation room, bland and windowless. He was young, too young, I thought bitterly, with a tight smile and a stack of papers in his hands. "Mr. Miller," he began, "first, let me reassure you. Alex is doing well. His injuries are healing as expected." "Then why am I here?" I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. He cleared his throat, shuffled the papers. "It's about the blood work," he said. "There's an anomaly." I leaned forward, heart pounding. "What kind of anomaly?" He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. "Mr. Miller, based on the genetic markers present in Alexander's blood, it appears there's a mismatch between his listed paternal information and his biological paternity." The words slammed into me, cold and brutal. "What the hell are you saying?" I rasped. "I'm saying, biologically speaking, Alexander is not your son." Silence. Crushing, suffocating silence. I stared at him, willing the words to rearrange themselves into something else, something that made sense. Not my son. Not my Alex. The doctor, and uncomfortable, pushed a pamphlet across the table. "Of course," he said, "mistakes happen. Record-keeping errors, hospital mix-ups. You might want to pursue formal testing through an independent lab if you have concerns." I stood up so fast the chair skidded back and hit the wall. "Thank you," I said through gritted teeth. "That won't be necessary." Because deep down, deep in the marrow of my bones, I knew. No mistakes, no clerical errors. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long, long time. I drove home in a fog, the steering wheel slick under my hands. The world outside blurred past, colorless, meaningless. All I could think about was Alex's first steps, his first words, the way he used to fall asleep curled against my chest. Memories, thousands of them, each one a dagger now twisting in my ribs. When I pulled into the driveway, Julia was waiting on the porch. She smiled, that same sweet, worn smile she had always given me after a long day. And for the first time in 25 years, I didn't smile back. The hardest lies to uncover are the ones you almost want to believe. I sat in the truck for a long time before I went inside. The house looked the same as it always had. Peeling paint, the porch light flickering, Julia's silhouette framed in the window. But I knew, deep down, that everything had changed. Or maybe it had changed a long time ago, and I was only just now seeing it. When I finally pushed through the front door, Julia greeted me with a small smile. "You're home late," she said, voice light, casual. I stared at her for a moment, my hands clenched at my sides. "We need to talk," I said. Her smile faltered. She must have seen something in my face, something colder, harder, because she didn't argue. She just nodded and wheeled herself into the living room. I followed, closing the door behind me with a soft click that felt, somehow, final. We sat across from each other in the flickering lamplight. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said very quietly, "Is there anything you want to tell me, Julia?" She blinked. "About what?" Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, twisting in her lap, knuckles whitening. I took a deep breath. "Alex isn't my biological son," I said. No accusation, just the truth laid bare. Julia flinched as if I'd slapped her. For a moment she said nothing, just stared at me with wide, glassy eyes. Then finally she whispered, "I'm sorry." The room tilted around me. Sorry for what? For lying to me? For letting me raise another man's child for 25 years without a word? "Who is he?" I asked. "The father." Julia shook her head fiercely, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It doesn't matter. He's gone. He's been gone for a long time." That's not an answer. My voice was colder than I intended, sharper. "Tell me, Julia." She squeezed her eyes shut, as if blocking out the world could erase the past. "It was before you," she said finally, brokenly. "Before we got married, I didn't even know I was pregnant until after the wedding. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. A convenient story. Too convenient." And a small, cold voice inside me, a voice I hadn't known existed, whispered, "She's still lying." I stood up. I couldn't sit there anymore. Couldn't breathe the same air without feeling like I was drowning. "I need some air," I muttered. Julia said nothing as I left. She didn't follow me. Maybe she knew even then that I wasn't coming back the same man who walked out that door. I drove aimlessly for hours, past the empty market stalls, past the shuttered diners and flickering street lamps. Somewhere along the way, a thought took root in my mind. I need to know the truth. All of it. And once I did, there would be no going back. I couldn't sleep that night. Couldn't sit still. Couldn't think straight. The walls of the house seemed to close in around me, familiar and yet alien, like I was living inside a memory that no longer belonged to me. Julia slept fitfully in the bedroom, or at least pretended to. I didn't bother joining her. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, my mind chewing over her words again and again. "It was before you." I didn't know. It doesn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered more than anything, not just the betrayal, though that alone was enough to hollow me out. It was the feeling that there was more she wasn't telling me, a deeper, uglier truth lurking beneath the surface, and I needed to find it. Around 3 a.m, I got up, moved quietly through the house, careful not to wake her. I started in the attic. Dust choked the air, coating every box, every forgotten relic of the life we'd built together. I dug through old tax returns, hospital bills, birthday cards, baby clothes, each item a little dagger twisting deeper into my ribs. For a long time, I found nothing, just the ordinary detritus of a modest, hard-lived life. But then, buried at the bottom of a battered filing cabinet, I found a box, a plain cardboard box, sealed with layers of yellowed tape. Something about it made my skin crawl. I sliced it open with a trembling hand. Inside were envelopes. Dozens of them, neatly stacked, all addressed to Julia. All from the same sender, a man named Charles Everett. The name meant nothing to me. At first, I ripped open one of the envelopes, heart hammering against my ribs. Inside was a check. $500, made out to Julia. No note, no explanation. Just the cold, impersonal ink of betrayal. I opened another and another. Month after month, year after year, regular payments, always around $500, sometimes more, stretching back over 2 decades. The earliest dated just a few months after Alex was born. I sat back on my heels, stunned. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the lie about Alex's paternity. Julia had been taking money from another man, Alex's real father, for years, feeding off him like a leech while letting me break my back to raise his child. The world tilted. I clutched the edge of the filing cabinet, fighting the sudden wave of nausea that threatened to buckle my knees. I had loved her, trusted her, built my entire life around the family we shared, and she had been lying to me every single day. I wanted to rage, to smash something, to tear the house apart with my bare hands. But instead, I sat there in the dust and the dark, feeling something colder and sharper take root inside me. A new kind of clarity, a new kind of resolve. I would not confront her yet, not until I knew everything, not until I had all the pieces. Because when I finally tore away the last of her lies, I would destroy her. I couldn't stop. Once the first crack had split open the perfect shell of our life, I couldn't help but dig my fingers in and pry it wider. I needed the truth, all of it, no matter how ugly it was. The next morning, while Julia was out at church pretending at piety, I pulled out my laptop and searched for the name, Charles Everett. It wasn't hard to find. Men like him always leave a trail. Charles Everett was rich, not movie star famous, but small-town royalty famous, real estate mogul, philanthropist, big fish in a very small pond. His smiling face adorned the local news sites, shaking hands with mayors, posing beside ribbon-cutting ceremonies, accepting awards for community service. And 26 years ago, he had been a young up-and-comer, handsome, charming, married. The pieces began to click into place with sickening ease. Julia had been his dirty little secret. A wounded girl in a wheelchair, easy to manipulate, easy to discard once things got too complicated. And when Alex was born, when the consequences of his selfishness came crashing down, Charles had chosen the easy way out. He bought her silence. A few $100s a month, and he pocket change to a man like him to keep the past buried, and Julia, she took the money. Month after month, year after year, while I broke my back hauling crates at the flea market, while I counted pennies to buy Alex new shoes, while I sacrificed and bled and loved with everything I had, she pocketed his filthy hush money. I found more evidence buried deep in Julia's files, hidden folders in our shared desk, cleverly mislabeled as medical records and house expenses, bank transfers, rental payments, even a private savings account in her name alone, stuffed with years of gifts from Charles Everett. My hands shook as I flipped through the printouts. All these years, every time I thought we were scraping by, just barely holding on. We could have been living easier. I could have spent more time with Alex instead of working double shifts. But Julia had hoarded it, hidden it, because acknowledging the money would mean acknowledging the betrayal. And the worst part, Alex didn't know. He had no idea that the man who had abandoned him, who had paid to erase him, lived just a few towns over, smiling for cameras and pretending to be a pillar of the community. I stared at the final bank statement for a long time. $120,000. That's how much Julia had taken over the years, not millions. Not enough to make her rich, just enough to make her complicit. Something inside me turned to ice. The love I had felt and the fierce, blinding loyalty shriveled into something small and sharp and deadly. Julia had made a choice. She chose lies over love, greed over family, and now it was my turn to choose. I waited until after dinner. There was something almost poetic about it. One last shared meal before the battlefield was drawn. Julia cooked her famous chicken pot pie, humming softly to herself like nothing had changed. And maybe, for her, it hadn't. Maybe she thought the worst had passed, that a few tears, a few half-truths would be enough to patch over the gaping chasm between us. She didn't know me at all. After we cleared the dishes, I sat across from her at the kitchen table. Same place we'd sat 100 times before, paying bills, helping Alex with homework, dreaming about a future that now tasted like ash. I placed the stack of bank statements and letters between us. Julia froze. Her hands hovered midair, then dropped into her lap. She didn't touch the papers. Didn't need to. She knew exactly what they were. How long? I asked, my voice low and steady. No accusations, not yet, just the question. She swallowed hard. Since Alex was born, she whispered. Why? A single word. 1,000 knives hidden inside it. Julia's eyes filled with tears. I was scared, she said. I didn't know what to do. Charles, he offered to help. I didn't want to take it, but we had nothing, David. Nothing. And then it was just easier to let it keep happening. Easier, I echoed, the words sour in my mouth. Easier to lie to me for 25 years? She flinched. I didn't lie, not really. I just didn't tell you everything. The rage came slowly. Not an explosion, but a slow, grinding pressure, like tectonic plates shifting under my skin. Every time you smiled at me, I said. Every time you watched me kill myself working double shifts. Every night you kissed me goodnight. You were lying. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. I stood up. Pushed the chair back so hard it toppled over. Julia jerked in her wheelchair, fear flashing across her face. Good. She should be afraid. You didn't just betray me, Julia, I said, voice shaking. You betrayed him. You betrayed Alex. Her face crumpled. He doesn't have to know, she sobbed. Please, David. Please, don't ruin everything we've built. Built on what? I spat. On lies. On dirty money, you think that's a foundation worth saving? She broke then, sobbing into her hands, her shoulders heaving. I watched her for a long moment. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No pity, no sorrow. Only the cold, clean certainty of a man who has nothing left to lose. You made your choices, I said. Now live with them. And I walked out. This time, for good, I slept in my truck that night, parked down by the river, wrapped in an old blanket, staring up at the indifferent stars. The river whispered secrets I didn't want to hear. The future stretched out before me, cold, uncertain, empty. I had lost everything. Or so I thought. Around dawn, my phone buzzed. A message from Alex. Hey, Dad, just checking in. Love you. Simple. Ordinary. But reading it felt like a blade sliding between my ribs, because whatever his blood said, whatever ugly truths Julia had hidden, Alex was mine. Not by biology, by choice, by love. By every sleepless night, every scraped knee kissed better, every proud tear shed at school plays and baseball games. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wouldn't tell Alex yet. Not until he was stronger, more stable in his new life. But Julia would pay. And Charles Everett, the smug, polished coward who had bought his way out of responsibility, he would pay too. Not with fists, not with screaming matches or lawsuits. That would be too easy. Too quick. No, I would take everything they cared about, their reputations, their security, their illusions of control. I would tear it all down. Brick by brick. And when they stood in the ashes, blinking and broken, they would finally understand. You don't steal a man's life without consequences. I pulled out a battered notebook from the glove compartment, flipped to a blank page, and started to plan. Revenge isn't about rage. Rage burns out too fast, leaves you reckless, sloppy, exposed. No, true revenge is cold. Measured. Precise. It's a slow knife, not a hammer blow. And I had learned how to be patient. Sitting in my truck by the river, the early morning mist curling around me like ghostly fingers, I began to write a plan. Simple at first, rough, messy. But as the hours slipped by, it sharpened. Each step clear, each target identified, each move calculated for maximum damage. First, Charles Everett, the man who thought he could buy away his mistakes, the man who wore his success like a mask, hiding the rot underneath. If I wanted to destroy him, I needed to rip that mask off in front of the world. Public humiliation, loss of status, legal consequences if I could swing it. Second, Julia, not physically, as I would never hurt her like that, but emotionally, financially, socially. She had spent years playing the victim while secretly profiting off another man's cowardice. I would make sure she ended up exactly where she deserved, alone, penniless, forgotten, and through it all, one rule above all else: protect Alex. He had nothing to do with their sins. He was the only real thing that had ever come out of this twisted web of lies. He deserved better. I started small, discreet, late-night visits to public records offices, quiet conversations with old market friends who knew someone, a name here, a date there. Piece by piece, I built a dossier on Charles Everett. It wasn't hard. Powerful men always leave messes behind them. You just have to know where to dig. Old lawsuits settled quietly out of court, a string of short-lived charity projects that looked suspiciously like money laundering schemes, a few whispered rumors about affairs, bribes, shady real estate deals. Nothing confirmed. Yet, meanwhile, I combed through Julia's private accounts. The savings she thought I didn't know about, hundreds of pages of financial records, transfer receipts, deposit slips, patterns emerged. Times when the gifts from Charles conveniently coincided with moments when Julia insisted we couldn't afford things. New clothes for Alex, a better car, even basic home repairs. Each discovery fueled the fire inside me, not rage anymore. Something colder, more focused, purpose. The first shot had to be perfect, no wild accusations, no dramatic confrontations. Just the slow, inevitable collapse of a man who had spent his life building his empire on rotten foundations. I started by leaking information, anonymous tips to local reporters. Copies of old court documents slipped into the mailboxes of rival businessmen, whispers planted in the right ears at the right cocktail parties, nothing too obvious. Nothing that could be traced back to me, just enough smoke to make people start looking for fire. Within weeks, it worked. The first article hit the papers. Charles Everett accused of financial misconduct in charity fund scandal. It wasn't the full story, not yet, but it was enough. Enough to make donors pull out of his projects. Enough to make city council members suddenly reconsider their endorsements. Enough to make reporters start digging harder. I watched it all unfold from a distance, the TV news segments, the angry editorials, the carefully worded statements from Charles's lawyers denying any wrongdoing. I didn't celebrate, didn't smile. This was just the beginning. Behind the scenes, I fed the flames, more documents, more anonymous tips. I pointed them toward the shady real estate deals, the bribery allegations, each revelation built on the last, until Charles wasn't just facing bad press, he was staring down federal investigations. The day I saw his smug, polished face on the local news, being escorted into a courthouse in handcuffs, I felt nothing. No triumph, no joy. Just completion, like ticking off a box on a long, grim to-do list, one down, one to go. Julia thought she had hidden it well, the secret savings account, the hush money tucked away like a squirrel hoarding acorns for winter. She thought she could survive whatever storm came. She was wrong. I waited until Charles's name was smeared across every news outlet in the county, waited until his assets were frozen, pending investigation, waited until the money stopped flowing. And then I made my move. First, I drained our joint accounts. Legally, every penny I could access, money I had earned, I pulled out and moved to an account Alex could use later in case things got worse. Julia woke up one morning to find our checking account empty, the mortgage unpaid, the utilities cut off one by one. She panicked, of course, tried to access her secret stash, only to find that I had reported her undisclosed income to the IRS, an anonymous tip. A detailed file of bank transfers, tax evasion, unreported income. The government came knocking fast. Faster than I expected, honestly. Frozen assets, threats of audits, possibility of criminal charges. Julia, who had once clutched her hidden fortune like a lifeline, suddenly found herself drowning in debts she couldn't explain away. I watched from a distance, no contact. No confrontations, just quiet, relentless pressure. The house started to crumble. The creditors started circling. The friends who had once pitied her, the ones who had whispered about the poor woman in the wheelchair, turned their backs just as quickly when the scandal broke, and through it all, I stayed invisible. Just a ghost, the man she had lied to, forgotten by the woman who had built her life on my devotion. It wasn't enough to destroy her. Not yet, but it was enough to leave her where she had left me, alone, broken. Betrayed by the people she trusted most. There was nothing left for me in that town, nothing but ghosts and rubble. The market stalls where I'd spent half my life hauling crates and haggling prices. The little house whose walls still echoed with the memories of a life that had never truly been mine. I packed what little I cared to keep, a few old photographs, a battered toolbox, Alex's childhood drawings, and left the rest behind. No goodbyes, no explanations. Some stories don't deserve an ending. The road stretched out before me like a scar across the earth, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't look back. I met Alex in a diner, halfway between his campus and the town I had abandoned. Neutral ground. Safe ground. He was waiting in a booth by the window, wearing that same crooked smile that had lit up my world since the day he was born. Except now I knew the blood in his veins didn't match mine, knew the lies that had wrapped themselves around our lives like barbed wire. But none of that mattered. He was still my son, and I had to tell him the truth. I slid into the booth across from him, took a deep breath, and began. I told him everything, the accident, the blood tests, the lies Julia had spun for a quarter of a century, the payments, the betrayal. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't shield him. He deserved the truth, all of it. Even if it shattered him. For a long time after I finished, Alex said nothing. He just sat there, staring at his hands, his knuckles white against the Formica tabletop. I watched him, my heart breaking all over again. Watched the boy I had raised wrestle with a truth he hadn't asked for and didn't deserve. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were wet but steady. "Are you still my dad?" he asked. The world blurred. I reached across the table, gripping his hand in both of mine. "I'm your father," I said hoarsely. "I have been since the day you were born. And I always will be. Nothing, not blood, not lies, not anything, changes that." Alex nodded slowly. Tears slipped down his cheeks, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. "Good," he said, "because you're the only dad I've ever had, and the only one I'll ever want." We sat there for hours, talking, crying, laughing in that broken, desperate way people do when the worst has already happened and somehow they're still standing. We made a plan right there between the stale coffee and greasy pancakes. A new life, together. No more lies, no more ghosts, just two stubborn, battered souls refusing to give up on each other. Alex offered to move in with me once he finished his degree, offered to help me find work, rebuild. I told him he didn't owe me that. He smiled in the same damn smile that had kept me alive for so long and said, "You didn't owe me anything either, but you gave me everything anyway." We found a small house in a quiet town. Nothing fancy. Just a clean place with a decent roof, a little yard, and neighbors who minded their own business. I started working again. Odd jobs, repairs, the kind of honest labor that soothed the raw edges inside me. Alex graduated top of his class, landed a good job at a company that valued loyalty over lineage. He insisted on paying the first few months' rent. I let him. It was a small price to pay for the pride blazing in his eyes. Slowly the wounds began to scab over, not heal, not yet. Maybe not ever, but scabbed enough that the bleeding stopped, enough that laughter came easier, that sleep came without nightmares, enough that some mornings I woke up and didn't feel the weight of betrayal crushing my chest. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun bled out over the horizon, Alex turned to me and said, "You know, Dad, we could have fallen apart." "But we didn't, we're still here." I nodded, took a sip of my beer, stared out at the dying light. "Yeah," I said, "we're still here." And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. Life doesn't hand you neat endings, it hands you scars. It hands you broken pieces. It hands you truths you wish you'd never learned, and it's up to you whether you bleed from them or build something stronger. I didn't get the life I thought I would, not the perfect marriage, not the flawless family. But I got something better, maybe. I got the truth. I got a son who chose me, even when the world told him he didn't have to. And I chose him again and again, with every breath, every step forward. Some people say blood is thicker than water. Maybe they're right. But I know this: love is thicker than lies, and loyalty is thicker than betrayal. If you've made it this far with me, through the pain, the wreckage, the rebuilding, thank you. Truly, stories like this aren't easy to tell. They're not easy to hear either. But sometimes the hard stories are the ones that matter most. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that healing is messy, that family is more than blood, that strength comes from surviving what should have broken you, consider subscribing. We share real stories here, stories of revenge, resilience, redemption. And I'd love to have you with me as we keep walking this wild, broken, beautiful road together. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember, sometimes the best revenge is living well.